The house sat at the end of a quiet lane where most people kept to themselves, the kind of place where neighbors waved from a distance but rarely crossed into each other's lives. It wasn't a rich neighborhood or a poor one, just a small, aging community where time moved slowly and everyone seemed to carry their own private worries. On most days, the sound of children playing or a motorbike passing by filled the air, but on that morning everything felt too still, like the world was holding its breath. A cold wind pushed dry leaves across the cracked pavement, brushing them against the old gate of a tiny home that looked forgotten even though someone still lived there. Inside that house, the smell of damp walls mixed with the faint scent of tea that had gone cold. The living room was small and cluttered with things that had clearly survived many years: faded photos, chipped cups, a broken clock that someone had tried to fix more than once. It was the kind of place that told a story even before anyone spoke a word. A story of hardship, a story of someone trying to hold on. And somewhere in that quiet, worn-down home sat the woman who would soon become the center of a storm no one in the neighborhood could have imagined. She wasn't someone people paid much attention to. She kept her head down, always polite, always soft-spoken, as if she feared taking up too much space. Her clothes were simple, her shoes worn out, and her hands carried the marks of someone who had worked hard her whole life. Far away from this small house, in a part of town filled with large homes, clean streets, and shining cars, her children lived lives that looked nothing like hers. They moved through the world confident and loud, surrounded by people who admired them or feared them. They didn't talk about their childhood much, and if someone asked about their mother, they would smile briefly and change the subject. To them, she was just a part of a past they had. They didn't visit. They didn't call. And they didn't care to know how she was doing. It wasn't that they hated her. It was worse. They felt nothing at all. They were too busy chasing money, showing off, and proving to the world that they belonged to a different class than the one they were born into. What no one knew, not even the woman herself, was that there was a secret connected to her life. A secret that could change everything. Something tied to a time before her children were even born, something that had followed her quietly through the years without her realizing it. And while she lived each day counting coins and stretching meals, somewhere in a law office miles away, her name sat on documents that linked her to a fortune so large it didn't seem real. But for now, she lived the life she knew, unaware of the shock that would one day make headlines and turn her children's world upside down. Before all of that, life was painfully simple. She woke up early because she couldn't sleep much anyway. Old age had a way of turning nights into long hours of thinking, remembering, and sometimes regretting. She would sweep her small yard even though no one cared if it was clean. She would wash her clothes by hand because her machine had stopped working years ago. She would sit on her small wooden chair by the window watching people pass by, wondering if any of them remembered what struggle felt like. She rarely spoke to anyone except the shopkeeper down the street, who let her buy groceries on credit whenever her money ran out. She always paid him back, even if it took weeks. People who knew her said she had once been beautiful, quiet, gentle, the kind of person men noticed even when she tried not to be noticed. But that was long ago. Time had softened her face and slowed her steps, yet there was something in her eyes that still held warmth, something that suggested she had loved deeply, even if life had not been kind in return. There were rumors, of course. There always are. Some said her husband had left her. Others whispered that he had died. A few believed there had been trouble, money trouble, family trouble, all kinds of trouble. But no one knew the real story because she never talked about it. She carried her pain quietly, like a weight she had learned to accept. The children she had sacrificed everything for had once run in and out of that house, laughing, shouting, filling the rooms with noise and energy. She had protected them from hunger, from shame, from the harsh judgments of the world. She had worked long hours, doing jobs that left her clothes soaked with sweat and her back aching. Also, they could study in good schools, wear nice clothes, and dream big. For a while, they treated her with the love she had always hoped for. But as they grew older, something changed. They wanted more. They wanted a life that didn't remind them of struggle, and slowly they began to pull away from her. By the time they entered adulthood, the distance was more than physical. It was emotional, cold, sharp. They stopped coming home for simple things. They stopped calling on her birthday. They stopped asking if she was okay. And eventually they decided she was a burden they didn't want to carry. They didn't tell her that, of course. They simply drifted away and let the silence grow bigger until she learned not to expect anything from them. She kept hoping they would return. Children always return, she told herself, but deep down, a small part of her knew they wouldn't. There were moments, small ones, that hinted at a darkness inside the family long before things fell apart. Times when the kids would snap at her for tiny mistakes. Times when they blamed her for not being modern enough, smart enough, or rich enough. Times when their pride grew faster than their hearts. The power between them had shifted. She was no longer the mother who guided them. She was someone they ordered around, someone they corrected, someone they felt they were above. Long before they physically left her, they had already abandoned her in their hearts. But she didn't fight back. She couldn't. She loved them too deeply, even when they hurt her. And maybe that was her biggest weakness, believing that love alone could hold a family together. Life continued this way, slow and predictable, until the day the truth about her past and her hidden inheritance began to surface. And although no one could see it yet, a storm was already moving toward that quiet house at the end of the lane. A storm that would expose greed, shame, betrayal, and every hidden crack in the lives of the children who had turned away from her. A storm that would show the world how far people are willing to go for money they don't deserve. And a storm that would finally reveal who this quiet woman truly was, and what she had been carrying all along. The shift began quietly, so quietly that the woman didn't notice it at first. It started with small things, voices that sounded colder, words spoken with less patience, and long pauses between messages that used to come much quicker. Her children had already been distant for years, but now there was something different behind their silence, something that felt intentional, something sharp. They only reached out when they needed something, usually money or documents, things she barely had for herself. She would try to smile through the calls, telling them she was fine even when her legs hurt too much to walk or when she hadn't eaten a full meal in 2 days. They didn't ask why she sounded tired. They didn't ask if she needed anything. They only asked for what they wanted, and when she couldn't give it, they ended the call quickly, annoyed that she had wasted their time. She didn't know that the tension building between them had started long before any phone call. Her children had grown into adults who were used to seeing others as either tools or threats. In their world, everyone was competing for attention, for power, for status. And because they came from a background they despised, they felt they had more to prove than others. When they finally climbed the ladder and earned a place among people they once admired from afar, they held on to that new life with a desperate kind of grip. Anything that reminded them of where they came from felt like a stain they had to hide. And nothing reminded them more of their old life than their mother. Around this time, rumors of money began swirling around their social circle. Someone mentioned that old land values in a nearby district had shot up. Someone else claimed that anyone tied to those plots could be sitting on millions without even realizing it. The children heard these things and laughed at first, brushing off the topic. But little by little, a strange curiosity grew inside them. They remembered stories their mother used to tell when they were young, stories about family land that had been left behind, papers she never understood, people who disappeared after making promises they never returned to honor. At the time, those stories felt like old family legends, things poor families told themselves to feel less unlucky. But now, with property values rising and everyone talking about sudden wealth, those old stories didn't seem so silly. They never asked their mother about it, not directly. Instead, they watched her from a distance, her life, her habits, her reluctance to ever mention her past. Her silence made them even more suspicious. In their minds, it wasn't possible that she was just living a simple, poor life because that was all she had. No, they convinced themselves she must be hiding something. And the idea of her hiding something made them angry. How dare she keep anything from them? How dare she not hand over whatever she had, after all the money they believed they had spent on themselves without her help? Their entitlement grew quickly, fed by greed, insecurity, and the pressure to maintain their lifestyle among people who valued wealth above anything else. It was the eldest son who pushed things the furthest. He had always felt he deserved more than his siblings, more than his friends, more than the world had given him. He had spent years building a name for himself, yet it never felt enough. Every time someone else showed off a new car or a bigger home, he felt a sting deep inside his chest. He told himself it wasn't jealousy, just motivation, but the truth was darker. He hated losing. He hated being second to anyone. And when he heard the rumors about hidden land wealth, something inside him twisted. What if his mother really was connected to it? What if she had rights? What if she had money that she wasn't touching out of stupidity or stubbornness? He began digging into records, talking to people, asking questions without using his real name. The more he learned, the more heated he became. He discovered that long ago, before his mother even met his father, she was tied to a property dispute involving a rich family. Something happened, something messy and unresolved, and the case had been buried under years of legal delays. But it wasn't dead. A new lawyer had recently opened the file again, trying to track down rightful heirs because the land sale had reached a value no one expected. And the oldest son saw one thing, her name. His own mother's name, right there on official documents. He didn't tell his siblings right away. He wanted time to think, or maybe he wanted time to control the situation before anyone else got involved. But he wasn't as patient as he believed. His temper flared more easily now. He snapped at his wife for small things. He made harsh comments at work that caused coworkers to avoid him. His mind kept spinning around the same thought: she can't handle this. She'll waste it. She'll give it away. She'll ruin everything. He didn't see her as a person anymore, just an obstacle. When he finally told his sister and brother, the reaction was explosive. The sister, who had spent years building a carefully curated image of herself online, perfect photos, expensive trips, flawless makeup, felt panic flood her chest. Her lifestyle was already stretched thin. Loans, credit cards, unpaid bills hidden in drawers. She was terrified that someone in her circle would discover the truth about her finances. To her, the idea that her mother had access to money and didn't share it felt like betrayal. She began calling the old woman more often, pretending to care, pretending to check on her health. But behind every soft question, she was searching for cracks in her mother's mind, trying to see if she was weak enough to be influenced. The youngest son was different. He had always felt like he lived in the shadow of the other two, always trying to prove himself, always trying to get attention in a family that never cared about the youngest child unless they needed something. When he heard about the inheritance, he saw an opportunity. Not for money, but for importance. If he helped manage the situation, maybe his siblings would finally see his value. Maybe they would treat him like an equal. But he didn't realize they never saw him as anything more than a tool, something they could use. Siblings began meeting secretly, planning how to get more information without alerting their mother. They spoke about her like she was a stranger, someone they barely knew. They listed her weaknesses, her kindness, her trust, her fear of causing conflict. They discussed ways to push her, corner her, confuse her. The eldest son suggested taking her to a lawyer who worked for them, not for her. The daughter mentioned convincing their mother that the legal process was too complicated for her to understand. The youngest suggested telling her lies about taxes and penalties, hoping she would hand over signing rights just to avoid stress. What none of them expected was that their mother began to sense something. Not clearly, not in full detail, but in the way a person senses a storm before it arrives. Suddenly her children were calling more, visiting more. They brought her food she didn't ask for. They asked questions that felt too personal, too pointed. She didn't understand why the sudden attention made her uneasy, but she felt something was off. The eldest son's tone was wrong, too tight, too controlled. The daughter's smiles felt forced. The youngest kept glancing around her house, like he was searching for something. She didn't confront them. She had never been good at confrontation. Instead, she grew quieter, watching, listening, waiting. Her heart ached with a fear she couldn't name, a fear that felt strangely familiar. It reminded her of a time long ago when people had pressured her over something they claimed belonged to them. She had barely survived that time. And as these new days unfolded, memories she had buried began to rise like ghosts. Meanwhile, the siblings' desperation grew. They learned that the lawyer handling the inheritance was close to making an announcement. If their mother signed nothing before that, she would have full control of everything. They imagined the worst, that she would donate the money or trust the wrong person or refuse to claim it at all. They didn't see the truth. Someone who had lived in poverty all her life would never waste a blessing like that. But their twisted view of her made them believe she would. The pressure from outside didn't help either. The eldest son was drowning in debts he hid from everyone. If he didn't pay soon, he risked losing his business. The daughter had a social event coming where she needed to show up in a new designer dress, or else she knew people would talk. The youngest son had fallen into a crowd that expected him to spend money he didn't have. All three of them were cornered by their own choices, their own lies, their own need to impress a world that wouldn't care about them once their money ran out. They pushed harder. They began arguing more, not with their mother, but with each other. They disagreed on who deserved more of the future inheritance. They fought over who would control the legal papers. Old wounds surfaced. The daughter accused the eldest of always bossing them around. The eldest accused her of being selfish and irresponsible. The youngest accused both of them of treating him like nothing. Their unity began to break apart even before they achieved what they wanted. Tensions reached a peak one evening when they visited their mother together for the first time in years. They stepped into her tiny living room, their expensive shoes sinking slightly into the old rug. She looked at them with surprise, then with a quiet fear. They sat close, too close, surrounding her with false warmth. Their voices were soft but heavy, carrying hidden demands. They asked about old documents, about land, about people she hadn't thought of in decades. When she hesitated, their smiles faded. Something in their eyes changed, something cold, something hungry. That moment marked the beginning of the unraveling. The mother felt her breath catch, her heart pounding with a warning she couldn't ignore. And her children, standing so close she could smell the perfume and aftershave she had never been able to afford, realized how easily they could break her if they needed to. The room felt smaller, the air felt, and for the first time in her life she feared her own children. None of them knew it yet, but they had crossed a line that would lead them into a darkness none of them were prepared for. A darkness born from greed, pressure, and the kind of anger that takes root when someone believes they're entitled to a life they didn't earn. And once they stepped into that darkness, there was no turning back. The night the crime unfolded wasn't supposed to be special. It wasn't a holiday, or anyone's birthday, or even a day with strange weather. It was just another quiet evening in the neighborhood, one of those nights when most people were inside, lights dimmed, fans humming, dinner plates washed and stacked. Nothing outside gave the slightest hint of what was about to happen behind the walls of that tiny, worn-down house at the end of the lane. Inside, the old woman sat alone on her wooden chair by the window, the same place she always sat when her thoughts felt too heavy. She had been uneasy all day. Her children had called again, too many times, asking too many questions. Their voices sounded urgent, tinted with something she didn't recognize anymore. She told herself she was overthinking. They were her children, after all. Why would they harm her? Why would they want anything other than her safety? But the fear sat in her chest like a cold stone, refusing to loosen. She had just finished a small meal, bread soaked in tea because it was all she could manage with the little money she had left, when she heard the knock. It was soft at first, then firmer. She froze, her hand trembling around the cup. No one visited her at night. No one visited her at all except the shopkeeper or the neighbor who occasionally borrowed something and forgot to return it. When she didn't respond, the knock came again, louder this time. She stood up slowly, feeling every ache in her old bones. With each step toward the door, her heart thudded harder, beating like it recognized danger even before her mind did. When she opened the door, she found all three of her children standing there, their faces tight with something she couldn't read. They smiled, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Her eldest son stepped in first, brushing past her like he owned the place. Her daughter followed, perfume too strong for a house that rarely smelled of anything nice. The youngest came last, his eyes darting around nervously as if he was already scared of what they came to do. Their presence filled the small living room quickly, turning the air heavy and tense. She tried to ask why they were there so late, but her eldest son spoke first. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, calm, forced. Her legs weakened. The way he said it didn't sound like a normal conversation. It sounded like a warning. They all gathered around her tiny table, the same one where she once served them meals when they were children, where she had placed birthday cakes, where she had cried quietly when they started drifting away. Now, that table felt like a cold stage where something awful was about to happen. Her daughter pulled out papers from her bag, placing them carefully in front of the old woman. The daughter's hands shook slightly, but her voice was sharp. "We found out about the land," she said. "About the money, about everything you didn't tell us." The old woman blinked, confused. The words didn't make sense to her. Land, money, everything. She stared at the papers, but the letters blurred together. She hadn't seen these documents in years. She had forgotten the details, buried them deep after life forced her to focus on survival instead of old promises and unresolved family matters. Her eldest son leaned forward, his jaw tightened. "Stop pretending," he hissed. "We know you're the heir, we know what the land is worth, we need you to sign the transfer, tonight." His tone cut through the room like a blade. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her own voice. I don't understand," she whispered. "What land, what money, I don't." The daughter slammed her hand on the table, making the old woman jump. "Stop lying. We're your children. We deserve that money. You owe us this." "You owe us." The words hit her harder than any slap. She looked into their faces, faces she had once kissed goodnight, faces she had protected from hunger and sickness, and she didn't see her children anymore. She saw something darker, something hungry, something desperate. Her youngest son avoided her eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, his foot tapping the ground. He looked like a child again, scared and unsure, but he didn't speak up. He didn't defend her. He just sat there, letting the weight of the moment crush them all. "I don't want to sign anything," she finally said, voice trembling but firm. "I don't know what you're talking about, and I'm too old for these fights. Please, just go home." Her refusal was quiet, gentle, almost pleading, but to her children it felt like betrayal. Her eldest son's face twisted with anger. All the pressure he had been carrying, debts, expectations, the fear of losing everything, exploded inside him. He stood up so fast that the chair scraped harshly across the floor. "You're doing this on purpose," he growled. "You want us to suffer, you want to keep everything for yourself." Tears welled in her eyes. No, that's not true, I never." He grabbed her arm hard, too hard. She winced, trying to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Sign it," he growled again, louder this time. Her daughter stood beside him, panic flashing across her face. This wasn't the plan, not exactly. They had come to pressure her, manipulate her, maybe scare her into agreeing. But this level of aggression, she hadn't expected it. She tried to calm him down, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Stop," she whispered. "Not like this, we just need her to understand." But her words held no real conviction. She wasn't trying to protect her mother. She was trying to protect the plan. The youngest son stood up, packing anxiously. He ran his fingers through his hair, breathing quickly. He felt sick. He felt trapped, but he didn't speak up. The old woman shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, please don't do this. You don't understand. I never had anything. I never hid anything." Her fear only made her eldest son angrier. He shoved the papers closer to her, his voice growing louder, more frantic. "Sign it." She pulled her arm back with all the strength she had left, her voice breaking into a sob. "No." That word, small, fragile, but defiant, snapped the last thread inside him. In a blur, he pushed her. He didn't think, he didn't plan. It was a sudden surge of rage, a flash of frustration and fear. The shove wasn't meant to kill, but it was too hard, too violent, fueled by too much anger. She fell backwards, stumbling over the carpet. Her frail body hit the corner of the table first, then the floor. Her head struck the floor with a sickening thud. The room froze. For a moment, no one breathed, no one moved. Then the daughter screamed. The youngest covered his mouth, his eyes widening in horror. "What did you do?" he cried. "What did you do?" The eldest son stood still, his hands shaking, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He hadn't meant for it to go that far. He just wanted control. He just wanted her to listen. He hadn't expected the fall to be so fast, so hard, so final. He knelt beside her, shaking her shoulder. Mom, wake up, get up." "I didn't just get up." But she didn't move. Her eyes were half open, unfocused. A thin line of blood ran from her temple, staining the floor slowly. The daughter dropped to her knees, sobbing. "This wasn't supposed to happen. We were just supposed to make her sign. That's it. You didn't have to push her." The eldest snapped at her, voice breaking. She wasn't listening. She was going to ruin everything. We didn't have a choice. But even he didn't believe his own words. The youngest son backed away until he hit the wall. He slid down, shaking violently. He had wanted to be included, to feel valued, but not like this, not at the cost of their mother's life. They all stared at the lifeless body on the floor. A silence so deep filled the room that it felt suffocating. The eldest son broke the silence first. "We have to clean this up. We have to hide what happened." His voice was flat, empty, like something inside him had already shut down. The daughter wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "But people know we came here. The neighbor saw us. We can't just..." He cut her off. "Then we make it look like an accident. She fell. She was old. No one will question it." He was already rushing through the living room, grabbing items, moving things around, searching for anything that could link them to a struggle. His movements were sharp, frantic, like he was trying to erase the crime from his own mind. The daughter tried to help, though her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She wiped surfaces, rearranged objects, forced herself to step over her mother's body again and again. The youngest refused to move at first. He stayed on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, whispering apologies that no one heard. When he finally stood, he couldn't bring himself to look at her. Instead, he followed his siblings, orders numb, hollow, broken. The house that had once held their childhood memories now held something far darker, a crime born from greed, fear, and the twisted belief that they deserved more than the woman who had given them everything. As they worked to cover their tracks, none of them dared speak the truth out loud. They hadn't just killed their mother. They had destroyed any chance of saving themselves. The night after the crime was chaotic in ways that no one could have predicted. The old woman's house, once quiet and worn, became a center of panic, guilt, and frantic attempts to make sense of what had happened. The children tried to act normal at first, speaking in calm tones and moving carefully around the room, but their nerves betrayed them. Denial gripped them. Each tried to convince themselves it hadn't really happened, that somehow it would all disappear if they stayed silent long enough. Some rationalized their actions, insisting they had no choice, that it was the pressure and stress that drove them to act, but deep down they knew the truth. They had crossed a line that could never be undone. Panic set in as they realized the reality of their mother lying still on the floor, and the house seemed smaller, suffocating, as they scrambled to move papers, clean surfaces, and cover any sign of struggle. Guilt began creeping in differently for each of them. The eldest son, still shaking, tried to control the situation, but flashes of horror crossed his face every time he looked at her. The daughter, once confident and composed, broke down repeatedly, unable to reconcile her actions with the memory of the woman who had raised them. The youngest son sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, whispering apologies that no one could hear, paralyzed by fear and shame. As the days went by, the weight of their actions began to settle in more heavily. The immediate social fallout was swift. Phones rang constantly, neighbors whispered, and the local community, once indifferent to the family, became a hive of speculation and suspicion. Public perception shifted dramatically. The siblings, who had once moved through their circles with charm and influence, now faced distrust, judgment, and the harsh spotlight of media coverage. Every achievement, every social post, every appearance was now reinterpreted through the lens of the crime, leaving them isolated and defensive. Friends and partners distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with people who had crossed such a moral line. Even within the family, alliances fractured. Old grievances and hidden resentments surfaced as each tried to protect themselves, and paranoia replaced the fragile unity they once shared. Sleep became elusive. Nightmares of the night's events haunted them, flashbacks struck without warning, and every quiet moment forced them to relive the panic and horror. They tried to maintain normal routines, but every action reminded them of the irreversible damage they had caused. The emotional toll extended beyond the siblings. Relatives and loved ones struggled with grief, anger, and disbelief. The neighbors, once distant, now felt the tension radiating from the house at the end of the lane. The broader community responded with shock and outrage. Media coverage amplified the story, turning the siblings into symbols of greed and betrayal. Rumors spread, social media exploded with theories and accusations, and misinformation only heightened the sense of chaos. As the siblings attempted to control the narrative, their efforts failed and their public reputations crumbled further. Legal pressures mounted, and the fear of interrogation and prosecution became a constant, oppressive presence. Each sibling faced the reality that they could not undo what had been done. Their lives, once full of promise and control, were now overshadowed by guilt, judgment, and an uncertain future. Within the house, and inside their own minds, the siblings faced a slow descent into psychological turmoil. Guilt manifested in nightmares, panic attacks, and insomnia. Every noise, every shadow reminded them of the night they had changed everything. Arguments erupted over small decisions, each one a spark reflecting deeper blame and regret. Where there had once been confidence and control, now there was fear and desperation. Even those who tried to maintain calm found themselves haunted by what they had done. The old woman's absence became a constant, aching reminder of the loss and the betrayal. The community's grief and outrage only intensified the siblings' internal suffering. The crime had not only ended a life but shattered relationships, reputations, and the sense of safety that everyone had once taken for granted. The aftermath was a slow, relentless punishment, stretching across the personal, social, and psychological realms, leaving a lasting mark that would never fade. The days that followed the investigation were relentless. Police and prosecutors moved quickly, and within weeks the truth of what had happened became undeniable. The siblings, who had once moved through life with confidence and entitlement, were confronted with the full weight of their actions. They were arrested, questioned, and formally charged with crimes that carried long sentences. The legal system, with its precise procedures and weighty consequences, gave no room for excuses. Each of them faced not only the reality of imprisonment, but also the public exposure of their guilt. Media outlets chronicled every detail, turning their lives into cautionary tales. Once admired for their wealth, style, and social influence, they were now for betrayal, greed, and moral failure. The sudden shift from respect to condemnation left them stripped of any illusion of control. Their reputations, once carefully constructed over years, were irrevocably damaged, and even those who had supported them in the past began to distance themselves. It was not only the law that judged them, but the collective conscience of a society shocked by the cruelty of their act. The consequences extended far beyond legal punishment. Their personal lives were fractured in ways that could not be repaired. Friends and partners abandoned them, unwilling to associate with individuals capable of such cruelty. Their family connections were destroyed, leaving them isolated and adrift. The memory of their mother, who had loved them unconditionally, lingered as a heavy reminder of their betrayal. Nightmares, guilt, and fear became constant companions, haunting their days and nights. Even as they sat in courtrooms or prison cells, the psychological toll weighed heavily, a silent but relentless sentence that no law could fully measure. They had gained nothing from their actions except loss of freedom, trust, and the love that had once been theirs without question. Every effort to rationalize or justify themselves felt hollow in the face of the damage they had caused, both to their mother and to themselves. Meanwhile, the broader community struggled to process the implications of what had happened. Neighbors and acquaintances grappled with disbelief, trying to reconcile the image of successful, confident adults with the stark reality of their cruelty. The story became a topic of public discourse, highlighting uncomfortable truths about human nature, greed, and entitlement. It exposed how power dynamics within families can become distorted when wealth and opportunity are unevenly distributed. It showed how societal pressure to achieve and maintain status can push individuals toward unethical, even violent behavior. The tragedy served as a mirror, reflecting the fragility of moral compasses when desire eclipses empathy and love. Conversations emerged about the responsibilities of children to their parents, the dangers of ignoring human vulnerability, and the ethical limits of ambition. In a way, the crime forced society to examine not just the act itself, but the cultural and psychological forces that allowed it to happen. Justice in this case was multifaceted. Legally, the perpetrators faced appropriate consequences, a system designed to hold them accountable for actions that society cannot tolerate. Yet justice also manifested in more subtle ways. The siblings' loss of freedom, respect, and community standing ensured that the cost of their crime extended beyond prison walls. The very act of betrayal left them permanently changed, their sense of self fractured, and their ability to trust or be trusted shattered. The mother's story, meanwhile, became a testament to resilience and the quiet endurance of hardship. Though she was gone, the revelation of her inheritance underscored an ironic truth. The wealth she had been entitled to could never replace the human connection that had been destroyed. In death, she became both a symbol of injustice and a reminder of the human cost of greed. Reflecting on the moral and psychological dimensions of the case, it is clear that the crime was not merely an outcome of financial temptation, but of deeper emotional failures. Entitlement, jealousy, and fear drove the siblings to act against the person who had devoted her life to them. Their actions illuminate how easily empathy can be by self-interest when combined with societal pressures and internal insecurities. The case challenges the assumption that family bonds are unbreakable, revealing how complex and fragile human relationships can be under the weight of ambition and greed. It also demonstrates the interplay between societal norms and personal ethics, how cultural emphasis on wealth and status can warp moral reasoning and distort priorities. As the community and courts closed the chapter on the case, the echoes of its lessons remained. People reflected on their own relationships, the importance of vigilance in recognizing unhealthy dynamics, and the need for compassion even when circumstances provoke frustration or resentment. The story of the siblings and their mother became a lens through which broader issues of morality, justice, and human behavior could be examined. It was a cautionary tale about how quickly life can spiral when desire replaces respect, when ambition eclipses care, and when people forget the intrinsic value of those who have nurtured them. Ultimately, the case reminds us that justice is not only a legal concept but a human one, intertwined with empathy, accountability, and the recognition that the choices we make ripple far beyond ourselves. In the end, the crime left permanent marks on the perpetrators, the community, and the memory of the woman whose life had been so quietly devoted to her children. Legal proceedings could measure the punishment in years of confinement, but the psychological, emotional, and societal consequences extended far beyond. The siblings faced a lifetime of reflection on the irreversible nature of their actions, while society was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about morality, power, and human vulnerability. The story concludes not with triumph or closure, but with a sobering understanding of how fragile trust and familial bonds can be, and how devastating the consequences of their betrayal are when human greed eclipses love and reason. It is a story that lingers, not just in headlines, but in the minds of those who witness the devastating cost of actions born from desire, fear, and the cruel misjudgments of human behavior.